sets of applications. The first one, a glittering array of talent. So, good afternoon, welcome. It's led by Carol Monaghan, and it's Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, treatment and research.
Myalgic Encephalomyelitis.
Fantastic. That's easy enough for you to say, but there we go.
Encephalomyelitis.
Thank you very much. Carol, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks for giving me this opportunity this afternoon. Myalgic encephalomyelitis, or ME for short, affects about 250,000 people in the UK. Because of the particular symptoms of this condition, the sufferers have flu-like symptoms that can go on for weeks, months, and in many cases years, leaving them bedbound. The big issue for the people living with ME is that there has been a dearth of funding into biomedical research. The major funding that's happened so far was a very controversial piece of research called the PACE trial, and that considered ME to be a psychological, not a pathological condition. Written questions that I put into the Department of Health about the biomedical funding shows that really, on average, we're looking at about £1 per year has been put into suffering per patient. So it's very, very poorly funded, and most of that funding is actually coming from ME charities. So there's a real need for us to raise awareness amongst both politicians and in the medical community and in the public, actually, because it's a largely unknown condition, and also to push for greater funding into biomedical research.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Stephen?
Carol talked about 250,000 people being affected. In fact, it's many, many more than that, because there's the indirect effect. If you have someone who is bedbound, and I'm literally talking here, sorry, Mr. Mayers, I'm talking about people who are physically incapable of leaving their bed for 2 to 3 years, that affects their children, it affects their family, it affects their entire support network. And I think what's so crucial about this debate is not just another one of asking more money for a specific subject. It's actually ventilating, shining the light on this condition, because there's so many misconceptions. And at the moment, I've got no problems with the charitable sector. And I think the charitable sector is a crucial part of our society. But it cannot take the whole of the strain by itself. And ME groups do an incredible amount of work, and I think all of us, virtually all of us MPs at some stage, have actually worked with our local ME groups. But we've got to really have a point at which we can start and say, this is the condition, this is the pathology of it, this is where we are and where we move on from here. And I think that time has come, because we've been wandering around, we've been flailing, we've never, ever in recent parliamentary history actually sat down and said, this is what it is and this is where we should be going. Which is why, you see, we are absolutely just about as cross-party as you can get here. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. Well, I don't think we need to wear...
We have DUP support as well for this.
Well, you've just lost me then. Oh, I beg your pardon.
Thank you very much.
And so the point is, so, Mr. Mayers, what is special about this is not just special pleading for a special circumstance, but I think it really is time this Parliament considered the issue of ME in the totality, because it affects a huge amount of people, and more people are being diagnosed. I'm not saying that the actual illness is increasing, but the diagnosis is increasing. There is so much misconception out there, and that is causing such pain and distress, that I think we have the chance to actually set the standard now and go on from there, which would be immeasurably beneficial, not just to the sufferers, but, as I make the special pleading, for their families and their friends.
Right. Nikki, please.
I want to back that up. I mean, I think back in 2012, I applied with Charles Walker and others, the first general debate on mental health to be held on the floor of the House of Commons. And just having that debate gave enormous hope, but also the fact it was being discussed in the main House of Commons chamber, and a number of MPs stayed behind on a Thursday, I think it was, to debate it. And I think that's actually what this debate is also about. I think ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, is one of those things that people have talked about. Stephen's absolutely right. I suspect all of us MPs have had cases individually about this. When I mentioned, and Carol is very modest, she held a Westminster Hall debate, just a short debate on this, and actually there was a significant number of members of Parliament. It had a lot of interest from people outside. And I know when I mentioned it in a local newsletter, I got quite a lot of constituents and others coming to me saying, thank goodness people are beginning to talk about this. There's a very powerful film called Unrest, which has been shown here, I think in the Speaker's House, and probably in other places around the country. And I think this would be the House of Commons at its best, actually, at its cross-party best, of MPs talking about this as an issue, where people are very grateful that the legislature is showing a huge interest. And I think ministers, actually, fun enough, will want to come and speak and answer questions, and shadow ministers too, because it genuinely is something of interest that we could all do something about to highlight.
I'll bring Ben in because he was here first.
Oh, thank you, Chair. No, I just want to add to what's already been said, really, and the fact of the matter is that so many of my constituents have contacted airing a bit of frustration, actually, that it is a debilitating condition, and yet there is so much stigma and misconception involved in the kind of general perception of the illness. And so I think if we were able to discuss this, in Parliament, on the floor of the House, I think it will give a lot of hope to those individuals suffering, and also, as Stephen mentioned, all those who support them, that this is being acknowledged as a real illness, and the effects and the impact that it has, on families.
Very briefly, as a disease, its PR is hopeless. What I mean by that is other illnesses crowd it out. So we hear an awful lot about cancer, about HIV, but ME finds it very difficult to get that airtime because it's hard to define, it's hard to diagnose and hard to treat. But that's all the more reason why it needs to be before Parliament.
Kerry?
Action for ME was based in my constituency. It's now just outside, so I've been working with them for a while, but I also have a very good friend who's had ME since she was 15, and there's quite often a link with either, some say it might be vaccinations, but I think she had glandular fever then, and she's now early 40s. And I think that the main difference between ME and most other illnesses is the fact that a lot of people aren't believed. And I helped my friend go through an ESA application. She'd basically lived with her parents for 20 years, never even tried to claim benefits. And in the end, we got her to the stage of saying, well, you're entitled to this. You've got an illness that means you're bedridden half the time and never held a job or anything. And, in the end, she won on appeal because she had the Royal Free Hospital decided she was a textbook case of ME, but she'd basically spent most of her life assuming that people would think that despite constantly being affected by migraines and limb pains and flu and just it's nothing like it's always like lots of little things that add up that just mean that you're not capable of going out and holding down a job or living a normal life. And I think that's why it's so important to people with ME that we do have a debate and we show that we don't think it's psychological, we don't think it's malingering, we actually feel that there is a condition that needs respect and needs research and needs to be treated seriously.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm something that although I can't pronounce it, it's something that I am entirely aware of. I remember a relatively good friend of mine who was fit, was a semi-professional footballer who actually contracted ME in the mid to late 1980s. And, at the time it was disparagingly dismissed in the media as yuppie flu, and it's totally wrong. And possibly that's part of the problem with the sort of media image of it, because particularly people of my age, their minds, it still has that sort of ring about it, so which is entirely unjustified. So thank you very much. Anyone want to ask any questions before the minibus comes to take them all away, please? Right.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Can I just ask what you want to achieve by having the debate, apart from obviously creating awareness? Because you've asked for a general debate, and I just want to clarify what.
Well, I think first of all, raising awareness is extremely important. I think a lot of people don't understand the condition, and that's politicians, and it's also, unfortunately, medical professionals as well. Often medical professionals are following the NICE guidelines, which are currently being revised because they're not considered to be adequate anymore. But the NICE guidelines say that people can exercise their way out of ME, or that's the best treatment, and it simply isn't. That's now been shown to be extremely damaging for those who have ME and can end up causing them further harm. So I think raising awareness both with politicians and with medical professionals, but also calling upon the government to take a more serious position in terms of funding biomedical research.
Well, I'm taking that point, you will appreciate that chamber time is in very short supply. we have a queue of applications on the waiting list, and there's a chance of getting a Westminster Hall debate for 3 hours at an earlier time, and it will be guaranteed 3 hours, as opposed to a chamber time debate, which you might get 2 hours 20 minutes if you're lucky at the moment on a Thursday. But there's no guarantee that you'd actually get a debate in the chamber this time ahead of the summer recess. But you could get a Westminster Hall debate before the end of this month. Now, given those your circumstances, if we offered you a Westminster Hall debate with the option, potentially, if you don't get the answers you like from the government, on coming back for a chamber debate, say in the autumn, would you take it?
I think we've had a Westminster Hall debate, and that was good. That was a good starting position. So my preference would be a main chamber debate. It will get more publicity if it's in the main chamber, but I suppose the main purpose of this actually is to get this being discussed by as many members as possible. So if there were to be a Westminster Hall debate with the possibility of a later main chamber debate, I think, that would be acceptable, but I really would want that main chamber debate.
One of the issues, Bob, is that the Department of Health is answering for this, but there's also huge implications for DWP. And therefore it's almost like a two-departmental debate, because the issues with DWP are so important to becoming evident. So in fact we actually need the two, which is why the chamber would be more appropriate.
Well, our job is
it's Carol's bill.
Our job obviously is to help facilitate debate and to help your application. One of the reasons why I suggest having a Westminster Hall debate first and finding out the attitude of the government in response could be that you could formulate a suitable motion calling on the government to actually do something in terms of medical research, which you could then bring back to the chamber subsequently, just as a way of assisting your application.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else, please? In that case, can I thank you very much for your application. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Right.